I never imagined that the moment my family finally chose to turn away from me would happen inside a hospital room, with machines beeping softly beside me and my children sitting on the floor, unaware that everything in our lives was about to change. What began as a medical emergency quickly became something else entirely, a reckoning that exposed years of quiet neglect and set events in motion that none of us could undo. My name is Natasha. I am 33 years old, a widow, and the mother of 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Emily. 6 months earlier, my husband James had died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, leaving me to raise our children alone. Since then, every day had been about survival, work, and holding myself together just long enough to make sure my children felt safe. I had learned how to function through exhaustion and grief, but nothing prepared me for the pain that brought me to the emergency room on Christmas Eve. The doctors at Las Vegas Medical Center told me there was internal bleeding and that surgery could not wait. I tried to stay calm while a nurse named Valerie checked my vitals and explained procedures I barely processed. Ethan pushed a toy truck back and forth near the wall. Emily hummed softly while hugging her stuffed giraffe. They trusted me completely, and that trust weighed heavily on my chest as I reached for my phone. There was only one option left. I called my parents. They answered through a video call, already dressed for the evening, excitement flickering behind their forced smiles. I explained the situation quickly, my words rushed and uneven, telling them I needed someone to watch the twins while I went into surgery. The response came instantly and without hesitation. My mother raised her voice, sharp and irritated, telling me they had plans. My father stood behind her, silent but unmoved. They reminded me of the concert tickets they had bought months ago and how long they had been looking forward to the night. I tried again, slower this time, explaining that this was not optional and that the doctors were concerned. My father finally spoke, his tone cold and final, telling me I was becoming a burden and that they were retired now and deserved to enjoy their lives. The call ended with my mother shaking her head and saying she could not believe I would ask them to cancel Christmas Eve plans. The room felt smaller after the screen went dark. Valerie stood beside me, her expression unreadable but her hand resting gently on my shoulder. The pain in my abdomen intensified, but what hurt more was the certainty settling in my mind. My parents were not coming. They were not asking questions. They were not worried about me or their grandchildren. They had already moved on. As another wave of pain hit, I stared at my children and realized that whatever happened next, I would have to handle it without them. And in that moment, I understood that this surgery was only the beginning of a much larger break that had been forming my entire life. While the nurse adjusted the IV and spoke quietly to another doctor, my mind kept replaying the call with my parents, not because I was shocked by what they said, but because it finally fit into a pattern I had spent years trying to ignore. This was not a single cruel moment. It was the same decision they had always made, just delivered when I was most vulnerable. Growing up, I learned early that attention in our house was limited and already assigned. My younger sister, Jessica, never had to ask for it. She was praised for small achievements while mine passed without comment. When I stayed up late studying for exams, it was expected. When she succeeded at anything, it became a family celebration. I told myself this was normal, that siblings were different, that I was simply more independent. That belief followed me into adulthood. When I married James, my parents complained about the distance to the venue and left early. When the twins were born, they visited once and said the crying gave them headaches. When James died, they sent flowers and returned to their routines within days. Through all of it, I kept showing up, kept calling, kept helping, because I believed that if I did enough, someday it would be returned. 3 years earlier, when my parents took early retirement, they told me they were worried about money. I offered to help temporarily. That help turned into a monthly transfer of $2,500, sent without fail, even after James died and my own income became uncertain. I never told them when I struggled. I never asked what they spent it on. I thought this was what responsible daughters did. Now I was lying in a hospital bed, facing emergency surgery, and they would not watch my children for a few hours. Valerie returned after stepping out of the room and told me the surgical team was preparing. She asked gently if I had arranged care for the twins. I shook my head. She paused, then said she might know someone who could help, a professional nanny who had experience with children in crisis situations. I told her to call. As she stepped away, I looked at my phone again. There were no missed calls, no messages, nothing. The silence was clear. For the first time, a different thought entered my mind, not panic, not fear, but something sharper. I wondered what would happen if I stopped trying to earn a place I was never meant to have. I wondered what would happen if I chose my children the way my parents never chose me. When Valerie returned and said her friend was on the way, relief washed over me, followed quickly by resolve. I asked for my phone again. My hands were steady as I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer scheduled for the following week. Then I typed a message to my parents, short and direct, telling them I would no longer be providing financial support and asking them not to contact me again. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, the pain intensified, but beneath it was something unexpected. The realization that whatever happened next, the rules of my life had already changed. I woke up hours later in a recovery room, disoriented and weak, with a dull ache spreading through my body that made it hard to move or speak. The surgery had stopped the bleeding, but the doctors warned me that the next few days would be critical. I nodded when they spoke, conserving energy, my thoughts drifting immediately to my children. Ethan and Emily were not in the room. Panic rose before logic caught up. Then Valerie appeared beside my bed and told me Olivia had arrived just before I was taken into surgery. She explained that Olivia had stayed with the twins, fed them, kept them calm, and taken them to my apartment for the night once the doctors confirmed I would be under observation. I listened quietly, absorbing the fact that a stranger had stepped in without hesitation while my own parents had refused. Later that evening, Olivia returned with the twins so they could see me briefly. Ethan climbed onto the bed carefully, copying the nurse's instructions with serious focus. Emily pressed her face into my shoulder and refused to let go. I held them both, aware of how close I had come to leaving them alone in the world and how easily my parents had accepted that risk. When Olivia stepped out with the twins, I reached for my phone. There were missed calls and messages waiting now, but not the ones I expected. My parents had noticed the canceled transfer. My mother's first message was confused, asking if there had been a banking error. The next was irritated. The third was angry. My father's message came last, short and demanding, asking what I thought I was doing and reminding me of their mortgage payment due date. None of them asked how the surgery went. None of them asked if I was alive. I read the messages slowly, feeling something harden inside me. This was not panic on their part, it was inconvenience. They were not worried about losing me, they were worried about losing access to what I provided. Jessica's name appeared next on the screen. Her message was different. She asked why our parents were suddenly calling her in a panic about money and why they were saying I had overreacted to a minor procedure. She said they told her I was being dramatic and punishing them for not rearranging Christmas plans. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Then I sent her everything. I explained the emergency surgery, the internal bleeding, the refusal, the timing, and the words they had used. I did not exaggerate or soften anything. I told her exactly what had happened and why I had cut off financial support. Her reply came almost immediately. She said she had no idea. She said they never told her it was serious. She said if she had known, she would have taken the twins without question. She apologized more than once, not defensively, but with shock. That was when I understood something important. My parents had not just abandoned me, they had controlled the story. And now, for the first time, that story was slipping out of their hands. As I set the phone down, exhaustion took over, but beneath it was a quiet certainty. The surgery had saved my body. Telling the truth had begun to change everything else. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days. Each morning, doctors checked my incision and warned me not to rush recovery. Each afternoon, Olivia brought the twins to see me, managing their routines with a calm efficiency that made everything feel temporarily stable. She did not ask for explanations. She did not offer advice. She simply handled what needed to be done. My parents did not visit. Their messages continued, shifting in tone but never in focus. First came frustration about the canceled transfer. Then accusations about abandoning them after everything they had done for me. Then warnings about bills, commitments, and plans they had already paid for. I read each message once and did not respond. Jessica, however, kept in contact. She told me our parents were furious and confused, unable to understand how I could do this to them. When she asked if I wanted her to explain the situation to them, I told her no. If they still did not understand, it was because they did not want to. On the 5th day, I was discharged. Olivia drove me home with the twins, helped me settle into bed, and quietly asked if I wanted her to continue helping during my recovery. I said yes without hesitation. I needed reliability, not apologies. That evening, my phone lit up again. This time, it was not a text. It was my parents at my door. I did not open it right away. Through the peephole, I saw my mother clutching her purse and my father standing stiffly beside her. I knew why they were there before they spoke. This was not about my health. This was about control. When I opened the door just enough to speak, my mother immediately asked how I was, her voice sweet and practiced. Before I could answer, my father interrupted, saying the bank had called about their mortgage and they needed to discuss this situation like adults. I told them I was recovering from surgery and caring for 2 toddlers. I told them I was not discussing money. My mother's tone changed. She said they had adjusted their lifestyle based on my support and that it was unfair to pull it away suddenly. My father said I was being emotional and irresponsible. I reminded them they had refused to help me when I needed them most. My father dismissed it, saying they had plans and that emergencies did not erase other people's lives. That was when something in me went quiet. I told them the financial support was over, permanently. My mother asked if this was punishment. I told her it was consequence. My father raised his voice, demanding respect. I told him respect did not survive abandonment. Emily appeared in the hallway, holding her stuffed giraffe. My mother immediately crouched down, calling her name and reaching out. Emily stepped back and looked at me instead. I asked my parents to leave. When they protested, I closed the door. As the lock clicked into place, I realized they were no longer negotiating from a position of strength. And they knew it. The next morning, the pressure escalated. I woke to missed calls and messages sent before sunrise, not just from my parents, but from extended family members I rarely spoke to. My father had acted quickly. He had sent a long email to relatives, describing how I had suddenly cut them off financially after years of support, framing it as an emotional reaction to a small medical issue. He wrote that they were struggling, confused, and heartbroken by my cruelty. He did not mention the surgery. He did not mention the twins. He did not mention refusing to help. By noon, Jessica called. She sounded angry in a way I had never heard before. She told me our parents had lied to her again, telling relatives I was unstable and being manipulated by outsiders. She said she had corrected them publicly and sent a short message to the family explaining that I had undergone emergency surgery and had been left without help on Christmas Eve. The response was immediate. Relatives began messaging me privately, asking what had really happened. I answered only when necessary and only with facts. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. I told the same story each time, exactly as it happened. By evening, the tone changed. An aunt called to apologize for believing my parents without asking questions. A cousin offered to bring meals if I needed help. Another asked if I had childcare covered. The support was quiet but steady, and it stood in sharp contrast to the chaos my parents were creating for themselves. That night, my parents returned. This time, they brought my aunt, positioning her in front like a shield. She knocked gently and asked me to be reasonable, saying my parents were panicking and feared losing their home. I spoke through the closed door. I said I was recovering from surgery and would not be discussing finances. My mother's voice cracked as she said they had made retirement decisions, assuming I would always help. My father added that they had commitments they could not undo. I told them those commitments were not mine. They accused me of turning the family against them. I said the truth had done that on its own. When they left, my phone buzzed again. A message from my father followed, sharper than the rest. He said I had embarrassed them and warned that people would not forget how I treated my parents when they needed me. I did not reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and contacted a lawyer recommended by a colleague. I asked about wills, guardianship, and how to protect my children if something happened to me. I gave names. My parents were not on the list. As I closed the laptop, a realization settled in. My parents were no longer trying to repair anything. They were trying to regain leverage. And the harder they pushed, the more obvious it became that the only thing they truly feared was losing control. 2 weeks after the surgery, my strength began to return, but the tension around me did not ease. My parents had stopped showing up in person, but their messages continued through indirect channels. Relatives mentioned conversations that felt rehearsed, warnings disguised as concern, questions framed to make me doubt myself. I recognized the pattern. They were testing which doors were still open. Jessica came over one evening after work. She did not bring excuses or advice. She brought facts. She told me our parents were in financial trouble far worse than they had admitted. They had taken a second mortgage months earlier. They had assumed my support was permanent. They had never planned for an alternative. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said she was tired of lies. A few days later, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. I almost did not answer, but curiosity won. His voice sounded strained, controlled, as if he were holding something back. He said they needed to talk calmly. He said things had gotten complicated. He said mistakes had been made. I asked him one question. I asked why, when I was being prepared for emergency surgery, neither of them had asked if I might die. There was a pause, then he said I was exaggerating again. The call ended there. That night, I received a notification from my bank. My parents had attempted to initiate a transfer from my account using old authorization information. The attempt failed, but the message was clear. They were no longer asking. They were reaching. I forwarded the alert to my lawyer. The next morning, Jessica called again, this time alarmed. She told me our parents had received a foreclosure notice. 60 days, that was all the bank was giving them. They were in shock, they were angry, and they were already blaming me. She asked me what I planned to do. I told her nothing. Later that day, my parents showed up again, unannounced. They did not knock softly this time. My father knocked hard, sharp, impatient. I opened the door enough to speak, but did not invite them in. My father got straight to the point. He said they needed a large sum immediately to stop the process. He said selling assets would take time they did not have. He said family did not let family lose their home. I reminded him that family also did not leave their daughter, bleeding alone on Christmas Eve. My mother began to cry. My father raised his voice. He said I owed them. He said everything I had was because of them. I told them the conversation was over. As I closed the door, my phone buzzed with a new message from Jessica. She said our parents had told her I would come around once I realized how serious this was. They were wrong. And for the first time, I knew they were starting to understand that. The pressure did not stop. It changed shape. Instead of direct calls, messages began arriving from people I barely knew. Distant relatives asked if I was aware of how serious my parents' situation was. Old family friends hinted that holding grudges could destroy families. None of them mentioned the surgery. None mentioned the twins. The story being circulated was careful and incomplete. Jessica told me my parents were telling everyone the same thing. They said I had promised to support them for life. They said I was unstable after my husband's death. They said someone was influencing me and turning me against my own family. The more desperate they became, the more extreme the narrative grew. Then something unexpected happened. A cousin who lived near my parents replied publicly to one of my father's messages. He asked why, if they were struggling so badly, they had recently bought a boat. Another relative followed up, mentioning a vacation my parents had taken only months earlier. The questions were calm, but they did damage. My parents reacted immediately. My mother called me in tears, not asking about my health, but demanding I fix what she called a misunderstanding. She said the family was turning against them because I had poisoned everyone. I asked her one question. I asked why, when she told people her version of events, she never mentioned that I had emergency surgery. She hung up. That evening, my father sent a long message, different from the others. He admitted they were in serious trouble. He admitted the foreclosure was real. He said the bank would not wait. He said if I helped them now, everything could go back to normal. He promised things would be different. I read the message twice. Then I noticed what was missing. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, no concern for the twins, only urgency and expectation. Jessica called later that night, her voice tight. She told me our parents had asked her to take out a loan in her name. She said they were pressuring her, telling her this was her responsibility as the good daughter. She said she had refused. She asked me if I was okay. I told her the truth. I told her I was done being the safety net for decisions I did not make. I told her I was not responsible for rescuing people who had never protected me. The next morning, a letter arrived at my door. It was handwritten. Inside, my mother described how frightened they were, how they had worked their whole lives, how unfair it was that everything was falling apart now. She wrote about sacrifices they had made for me as a child. She did not mention the hospital. She did not mention the refusal. She did not mention Christmas Eve. At the bottom, she wrote that they needed help immediately. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without responding. Because by then, I understood something clearly. They were not reaching out because they had changed. They were reaching out because they were running out of options. A week later, the situation escalated beyond messages and letters. Jessica called me early in the morning, speaking quickly, telling me our parents had asked her to come over because they needed help organizing documents for the bank. She agreed only because she wanted to see the numbers herself. What she found shocked her. They were not confused, they were reckless. They had taken out a second mortgage, assuming my money would continue indefinitely. They had emptied most of their retirement savings on a business investment recommended by a friend, an investment that had failed months earlier. They had hidden this from everyone, including Jessica, while continuing to live as if nothing had changed. Jessica told me they were angry with her for asking questions. My father accused her of siding with me. My mother cried and said she could not believe both her daughters had turned against her. When Jessica suggested selling the boat and downsizing, my father refused, saying those were their rewards for a lifetime of work. Later that day, my parents came again. This time, I let them in. They sat at my table and spread papers across it, numbers highlighted, deadlines circled, urgency thick in every word. My father spoke as if presenting a case, explaining how much they needed and how quickly. My mother added emotional weight, talking about fear, humiliation, and the shame of losing their home. When they finished, they waited. I asked one question. I asked why, if they were willing to humble themselves now, they could not humble themselves when I asked for help during surgery. My father said that was different. I asked how. He said they did not think it was that serious. I reminded them the doctor had warned there was risk. I reminded them I had begged. My mother said she could not go back in time. She said what mattered now was family sticking together. I told them family did not only show up when money was involved. The conversation turned sharp. My father said I was enjoying their suffering. He said I was punishing them. He said everything I had was because of them and that I owed them support. I stood up and told them I would not give them money. My mother cried harder. My father said I would regret this. He said people would judge me when they knew I let my parents lose their home. I told them they were free to tell anyone whatever story they wanted. They left without another word. That evening, Jessica called again. She told me our parents had already contacted a realtor, not to sell, but to ask if delaying foreclosure was possible. It was not. The bank would move forward. For the first time, their crisis was no longer theoretical. And for the first time, I felt no urge to save them. The foreclosure notice became real faster than anyone expected. Jessica told me the bank had posted the final warning on the door. 60 days had turned into 30 after missed paperwork and ignored calls. My parents were scrambling now, not planning, not negotiating, only reacting. Every move they made came too late. They tried a different approach. My father sent a message late at night, calmer than before, almost reflective. He said they had made mistakes. He said pride had gotten in the way. He said if I helped them this once, they would sell assets later and pay me back. He wrote that families survive by covering for each other when things go wrong. I noticed he still did not say sorry. The next morning, my mother called Olivia's number. She somehow found it. Olivia told me immediately. She said my mother asked questions about my recovery schedule and work hours, then hinted that I was being influenced and taken advantage of. Olivia shut the conversation down and blocked her. That was the moment I realized how far they were willing to go. Jessica visited that afternoon, visibly shaken. She told me our parents had asked her to move in with them temporarily and contribute financially. When she refused, they accused her of betrayal and said she had been corrupted by my bitterness. They told her that when they lost their home, it would be on both of us. I asked Jessica what she wanted to do. She said she wanted out. She said she was tired of being the good daughter only when it was convenient. She said watching them panic had shown her how little they valued people over comfort. She said she was done carrying guilt that was never hers. That evening, my lawyer emailed me drafts of the will and guardianship documents. I read them carefully. Every decision was deliberate. Trusted friends, clear instructions, no room for interference. I signed them electronically and sent them back. The sense of control was immediate. 2 days later, my parents showed up again. This time they were not angry, they were afraid. My father spoke quietly, telling me they had been advised to prepare for eviction. My mother said she could not sleep. She asked if I really wanted my children to grow up knowing their grandparents lost everything because I refused to help. I told her my children would grow up knowing their mother protected them. My father said I was being heartless. I told him I was being finished. When they left, my phone buzzed with a message from a relative. She said she had heard my parents might lose their house and wanted to know if it was true. I replied with one sentence. I said they made choices assuming my money would never stop. That night, I sat awake listening to the quiet of my apartment, aware that something irreversible had already happened. My parents were no longer asking for help. They were bracing for impact. And for the first time, they were doing it without me. The call came 3 weeks later. Jessica's voice was tight, controlled in the way people sound when they are trying not to panic. She told me my parents had received the official eviction timeline. They had missed the final window to negotiate. The house would be sold to cover the debt. They were being told to prepare to move within weeks. I did not respond right away. Jessica kept talking, explaining that our parents were calling everyone again, this time not to accuse but to beg. She said they were asking relatives for short-term loans, promising repayment once things stabilized. No one was agreeing. Too many questions had already been asked. Too many inconsistencies had surfaced. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me our parents were telling people I had agreed to help, but was delaying the transfer. I felt a sharp clarity settle in. That evening, my father called. He did not waste time on greetings. He said they were on the edge now. He said this was the last chance. He said if I sent the money immediately, the bank might pause the process. He said he did not understand why I was dragging this out when the solution was simple. I asked him how much they needed. He gave a number so large, I almost laughed. I asked him if he had sold the boat. He said no. I asked him if they had listed the house. He said it was too late. I asked him if he had asked how my recovery was going. There was silence. Then he said I was cruel for bringing that up now. I told him something he had never heard from me before. I told him I would not save them. I told him they would have to live with the consequences of choices they made while assuming I would absorb the damage. My mother took the phone. She cried openly this time. She said she was scared. She said she had never imagined things would go this far. She said she did not understand how I could let this happen. I told her I had asked for help once. She said that was different. I told her this was not. She asked if there was anything she could say to change my mind. I told her no. The next day, Jessica sent me screenshots, messages from our parents to relatives asking them to convince me. One message said I was holding a grudge. Another said grief had made me unstable. Another said I was punishing them for not rearranging a single night. The pattern was obvious now. They were not facing what they had done. They were still rewriting it. That night, I blocked both of their numbers. Not out of anger. Out of certainty. Because whatever happened next, it would happen without my permission, without my money, and without my silence. Blocking my parents did not stop the situation from unfolding. It only removed me from the center of it. Jessica became the one they contacted next, and this time they did not pretend. They told her directly that I had destroyed their lives. They said, if she cared about family, she would step in where I had failed. They reminded her of everything they had paid for when she was younger and warned her not to become like me. Jessica did not argue. She listened. Then she left their apartment and called me from her car. She told me she had seen the eviction notice taped to the door. She told me boxes were stacked in the hallway, not from planning, but from panic. She told me our parents looked older than she remembered, smaller, stripped of the confidence they always used to control every conversation. She also told me something else. Our father had said he never believed I would actually stop helping. He said I had always backed down before. He said this time I had gone too far and that once reality hit, I would panic and send the money. Hearing that confirmed everything. They had never taken my boundaries seriously. 2 days later, a message arrived through a cousin. It was short and blunt. My parents were asking if I would at least take them in temporarily once they lost the house. The cousin said they were framing it as a reasonable family solution. I did not respond. That evening, Jessica came over and sat quietly at my table. She said she needed to tell me something before I heard it from someone else. She said our parents were telling people that once they were homeless, it would be impossible for me to refuse them. They were assuming I would not let them suffer publicly. They were wrong again. The next morning, I received an email from my lawyer. He confirmed that my parents had no legal claim to my home, my finances, or my decisions. He advised documenting all third-party contact attempts in case harassment escalated. As if on cue, my aunt called later that day. She said my parents were in despair. She said they had nowhere to go. She asked if I could reconsider, even temporarily. I told her I was not responsible for providing housing to people who refused to protect me when my life was at risk. She did not argue. That night, Jessica texted me a single sentence. They're being told to leave by the end of the week. I stared at the message, feeling neither relief nor guilt. Only finality. Because the moment they lost the house, they would lose the illusion that I existed to catch them when they fell. The eviction happened quietly. Jessica called me the morning it did. She said a moving truck was parked outside my parents' house and a legal notice had been posted on the door. She said neighbors were watching from across the street, whispering, curious. She said our parents were arguing with each other, not about where they would go, but about who was responsible. They did not call me. That silence lasted 2 days. On the third day, messages started appearing again, not from my parents directly, but from people around them. An old family friend asked if I knew where my parents were staying. A distant cousin said my mother had been crying and said she did not understand how things had fallen apart so fast. I replied with short answers when necessary and avoided explanations. Jessica filled in the gaps. She told me my parents had moved into a small temporary rental arranged by a relative. She told me my father was furious and humiliated, convinced that everything would have been fine if I had just done what was expected. She told me my mother was quieter now, withdrawn, no longer angry, just confused about why their usual tactics had stopped working. Then something shifted. Jessica said my father had tried to contact my lawyer. He wanted to know if there was any legal way to force me to contribute. There was not. That attempt failed quickly, and when it did, the tone changed again. My parents stopped blaming me publicly. They stopped demanding help. Instead, they began telling people they were sick, overwhelmed, and misunderstood. They implied reconciliation was possible if I reached out. I did not. A week later, a letter arrived. It was not an apology. It was not a demand. It was a description of how difficult their lives had become. It listed inconveniences, losses, and discomforts. It ended by saying they never imagined I would be capable of letting things go this far. I read it once and set it aside. That same day, Jessica told me our father had started a part-time job. She said he complained constantly, saying it was beneath him, but he had no choice. She said my mother was trying to sell jewelry online, pieces I remembered her showing off years earlier. They were adapting. Not because they had changed, but because they had to. That night, after the twins were asleep, I checked my phone and saw a missed call from an unknown number. I did not return it. A minute later, a message came through. It was from my father. He said he wanted to talk. Not about money, not about blame. He said he wanted to explain. I stared at the screen, aware that whatever he planned to say now would be different from everything before. Not because he understood, but because he had finally run out of leverage. I did not respond to my father's message right away. 2 days passed, then 3. During that time, Jessica kept me updated without commentary. She told me our parents were struggling to adjust. She said the apartment they were staying in was small and temporary. She said the reality of their situation was settling in, slowly and painfully. Then my father sent another message. This one was shorter. He said he knew he had no right to ask for anything. He said he wanted to meet, just to talk. He said he was tired. I agreed to meet him, but only in a public place and only for a short time. We met at a cafe near my home. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked thinner, his posture different, as if the authority he once carried had been stripped away by circumstances he could not control. He sat across from me without speaking for several seconds. When he finally did, he did not apologize. He talked about stress. He talked about pressure. He talked about how fast everything had collapsed and how unprepared they were. He said he never expected things to spiral the way they did. He said he assumed I would step in, like I always had. That was the first honest thing he said. I asked him if he understood why I stopped. He said he understood that I was angry. I asked him if he understood that I had been alone, bleeding, and afraid while they chose not to help. He looked away and said he did not want to relive that night. I told him that night was the reason we were sitting there. He tried to redirect the conversation. He talked about the future. He said maybe things could be repaired slowly. He said my mother was struggling more than she admitted. He said she cried often now. I asked him why none of this mattered when I needed them. He had no answer. When we stood to leave, he asked quietly if there was any chance I would help them financially again, even in a small way. I told him no. His face hardened, just briefly, before settling back into resignation. He said he hoped one day I would understand how hard this had been for them. I did not argue. That evening, Jessica called and told me my mother had reacted badly when she found out I met my father alone. She accused him of making things worse. She accused me of being cold and calculated. She said I had changed. She was right. I had. And the next step in this story was already forming, whether they were ready for it or not. The meeting with my father did not bring calm. It triggered urgency. 2 days after we met, Jessica called me late at night. She said our parents were arguing constantly now, not about money, but about blame. My mother accused my father of mishandling everything. My father accused my mother of encouraging a lifestyle they could not afford. Neither of them mentioned me directly, but everything circled back to the same conclusion. They believed I had changed the outcome by refusing to step in. The next morning, my mother contacted me for the first time since the eviction. She did not call, she sent a message. It was carefully written, softer than before, measured. She said she wanted to meet. She said she needed to explain herself. She said there were things I did not understand and that she deserved a chance to be heard. I agreed, under the same conditions as before. We met at the same cafe. She arrived early and stood when she saw me, reaching for a hug I did not accept. She sat back down, clearly unsettled, and began talking immediately, as if silence might undo her. She spoke about fear. She spoke about aging. She spoke about how quickly everything had fallen apart. She said she never imagined her life would end up this way. She said she had trusted that things would always work out because they always had. I asked her why, when I was in the hospital, none of that fear mattered. She said she did not think it would go that far. I asked her why she never called after the surgery. She said she assumed I needed space. I asked her why space mattered more than making sure I survived. She stopped talking. After a long pause, she said something different. She said she had always believed I was strong enough to handle things on my own. She said she thought I did not need them the way Jessica did. She said she did not realize how much that belief had cost me. It was not an apology. It was an explanation. She then asked if we could start over. She said they were not asking for everything back. She said even a small amount of help would ease the pressure. She said it would show goodwill. I told her goodwill did not come with conditions. She said she felt punished. I told her I felt finished. Her expression changed then, frustration breaking through. She said I was being unforgiving. She said families survive by letting things go. She said I was tearing something apart that could still be repaired. I told her it had already been torn long before the surgery. When we stood to leave, she asked one final question. She asked if I truly believed they deserved what had happened. I told her what happened was not about deserving. It was about consequences. As I walked away, I knew this was not the end. It was the moment they would decide whether to adapt quietly or make one final attempt to force their way back into my life. They made their final move sooner than I expected. 3 days after my meeting with my mother, Jessica called me in the afternoon, her voice low and urgent. She said our parents had told her they were planning to come to my apartment together that evening. Not to talk, not to explain, to confront. They believed if they showed up as a united front, I would give in. I did not change my plans, I did not leave, I did not prepare arguments. When the knock came, it was firm and deliberate. I opened the door enough to see both of them standing there. My father's expression was tight, controlled. My mother looked strained, her composure held together by effort. They did not ask to come in. They stepped forward as if it were assumed. I blocked the doorway. My father spoke first. He said they were out of time. He said the temporary rental was ending and that staying with relatives was no longer an option. He said they needed a solution, and that solution was family. My mother added that this situation had gone on long enough. She said everyone was exhausted. She said it was time to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. I told them they were not coming inside. My father's voice hardened. He said I was being dramatic again. He said they had raised me, supported me, and sacrificed for me, and that letting them struggle like this was cruel. He said no decent daughter would turn her parents away. I asked him if a decent parent would leave their daughter bleeding alone on Christmas Eve. My mother interrupted, saying that night was being exaggerated and that bringing it up again was manipulative. She said I was using it as leverage. She said life did not revolve around one incident. I told her that incident was the moment everything became clear. My father said they were not asking for charity. He said they would help with the children. He said they would make themselves useful. He said it would only be temporary. I told him I did not trust them. That was when the anger surfaced. My father said I was ungrateful. He said I had always thought I was better than them. He said I had been waiting for an excuse to abandon them. My mother said I was punishing them because my life had not turned out the way I wanted. I listened without interrupting. Then I told them something they had not expected. I told them they were not welcome in my home now or in the future. I told them I would not provide money, housing, or access to my children. I told them any further attempts to force contact would go through my lawyer. There was silence. My mother looked stunned. My father looked offended, then furious, then uncertain. For the first time, they understood this was not a phase. It was not anger. It was a closed door. My father said I would regret this. I told him I already survived what I was supposed to regret. I closed the door and locked it. Inside, the apartment was quiet. The twins were asleep. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica asking if they had come. I replied with one word. Yes. And I knew, with complete certainty, that this was the last time they would ever try to take something from me by force. After that night, everything slowed down. Not because the situation resolved, but because my parents had finally exhausted every direct path to me. They did not come back. They did not call from new numbers. They did not send anyone else. The silence felt different from before. It was not strategic, it was forced. Jessica confirmed it a few days later. She told me our parents had stopped talking about me altogether. Not out of respect, but because they no longer knew what angle to take. Their energy shifted inward, toward survival rather than control. They downsized again. The temporary rental ended sooner than expected, and they moved into a small condo owned by a distant relative. It was cramped and conditional. They were told clearly that this was not permanent. My father complained openly about the loss of status. My mother said very little, keeping her thoughts to herself. Then something unexpected happened. My father took a job. It was part-time, physical, and far from anything he had imagined for himself at this stage of life. Jessica said he came home angry every day, not at the work, but at the fact that he had to do it at all. He told anyone who would listen that none of this would have happened if I had behaved differently. But the story was losing its audience. Relatives stopped engaging. Friends stopped offering sympathy. The pattern had become too obvious. Every explanation led back to the same question that no one asked out loud anymore. Why had they assumed I would always fix everything? At the same time, my own life was shifting. I returned to work slowly, setting firm limits on my schedule. Olivia continued helping with the twins, giving me space to rebuild without collapsing. I finalized everything with my lawyer, making sure there were no gaps, no assumptions, no room for interference. Then Jessica told me something that confirmed what I already suspected. She said our parents were waiting. They believed time would soften me. They believed distance would turn into guilt. They believed silence would eventually make me reach out. They were wrong. Because the silence was not empty, it was solid. It was the result of decisions finally aligning with reality. And whatever they planned next, if anything at all, would have to exist without my involvement, my money, or my forgiveness. The silence broke without warning. One afternoon, Jessica called and asked if I was sitting down. She said our father had collapsed at work. Not dramatically, not publicly, but enough that an ambulance had been called. He was taken to the hospital and kept overnight for observation. High blood pressure, chest pain, stress-related, the doctors said. It was the first time in months that fear entered the situation from a direction I did not control. My parents did not call me. They did not ask to see me. They told the nurses they had 2 daughters, but only Jessica was listed as a contact. That detail mattered more than the diagnosis. Jessica went to the hospital. She told me our father looked shaken, smaller than she had ever seen him. She said my mother stayed close, unusually quiet, no accusations, no anger, just watchful. Later that night, Jessica called again. She said my father had asked about me, not angrily, not defensively. He asked how I was doing and whether I was recovered. It was the first time since the surgery that question had been asked. I said nothing. The next day, a message arrived from my mother. It was brief. She said my father was being discharged and that the scare had changed things. She said they had started family therapy at Jessica's insistence. She said they were trying to understand how everything had reached this point. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for help. She asked if I would be willing to read a letter when I felt ready. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was handwritten, careful, slow. My mother wrote about watching my father struggle with the idea that his life had become smaller. She wrote about recognizing patterns she had defended for decades. She admitted she had relied on my strength to avoid confronting her own failures. She acknowledged, without explanation, that leaving me alone during surgery was unforgivable. There was no request at the end. No pressure. No timeline. Just an apology that did not try to undo itself. I folded the letter and set it aside. That night, after the twins were asleep, I thought about how close everything had come to collapsing completely. I thought about how easily fear could pull me back into old roles if I let it. And I understood something important. Change, when it comes, never arrives with guarantees. Only choices. And the next one would be mine. I did not respond to the letter immediately. Days passed, then a week. During that time, nothing dramatic happened, which made everything feel heavier. Jessica did not push me. She told me therapy sessions were continuing and that our parents were being forced to hear things they had never allowed before. She said it was uncomfortable. She said it was real. Then something shifted again. Jessica called one evening and said our parents had made a decision without asking me first. They had sold what little was left of their luxury items and moved into a smaller, permanent apartment they could afford on their own income. It was not ideal. It was not comfortable, but it was theirs. They were no longer waiting for rescue. That detail mattered. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one was from my father. He wrote differently than my mother. Fewer words, no emotion layered over explanation. He admitted he had always believed providing money mattered more than providing presents. He admitted he mistook control for responsibility. He wrote that the night of my surgery replayed in his mind often now, not because of guilt, but because it revealed who he had been unwilling to see. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for access. He asked if, someday, it might be possible to know his grandchildren without damaging them. That question stayed with me. I talked to my lawyer before doing anything else. I asked what boundaries could look like if I chose to allow limited contact. I asked how to protect my children if old patterns resurfaced. I did not ask how to repair the relationship. I asked how to contain it. Then I spoke to Jessica. She told me she would support whatever decision I made. She also told me something I had not expected. She said therapy had forced her to see how easily she had benefited from dynamics that hurt me. She said she was learning to step back when our parents tried to pull her into old roles. That night, I finally wrote back. I kept it short. I acknowledged the letters. I said I was not ready for reconciliation. I said any future contact would be slow, structured, and centered on my children's safety. I said trust would not be assumed, it would be demonstrated. I did not send warmth. I sent clarity. The reply did not come immediately. And for the first time, I did not wonder whether it would. The response came a week later. It was not emotional, it was not defensive, it was careful. My parents agreed to the terms I had set without negotiation. They did not argue about structure or complain about limits. They asked what supervised contact would look like and how often it might happen if things went well. They did not ask when it would start. That restraint unsettled me more than anger ever had. I consulted my lawyer again and set conditions in writing. Meetings would be public. Jessica would be present. No discussions about money, blame, or the past unless I initiated them. Any attempt to pressure, guilt, or rewrite events would end contact immediately. No exceptions. The first meeting was scheduled for a cafe near my home. I arrived early with Jessica. My parents arrived on time. That alone was new. They did not rush toward me. They did not attempt affection. They sat down and waited. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she held her cup. My father kept his posture controlled, but his eyes moved constantly, as if measuring consequences. The conversation stayed neutral. They asked about the twins. I answered briefly. They asked about my recovery. I answered once. No one mentioned money. No one mentioned the house. No one mentioned the past. After 30 minutes, I stood and said the meeting was over. My father nodded. My mother thanked me for coming. That was it. Over the next month, 2 more meetings followed the same pattern. Predictable, contained, uneventful. They did not push. They did not test boundaries openly, but I noticed something else. They were watching me. Not with control, with caution. They were learning that access was conditional now. Jessica later told me therapy had shifted from grief to accountability. She said our parents were being forced to confront how entitlement had shaped every decision they made. She said it was not comfortable. She said it was slow. Then, without warning, my mother slipped. During the 4th meeting, she mentioned how hard it was not seeing the twins more often. The comment was subtle, almost innocent, but it carried expectation. It carried pressure. I ended the meeting immediately. No explanation, no debate. Jessica backed me without hesitation. That night, my mother sent a message apologizing. She acknowledged crossing a line. She did not defend it. She did not justify it. She asked if we could continue at the pace I chose. That message mattered. Because for the first time, consequences had been enforced without drama, and they had been accepted. I understood then that reconciliation, if it happened at all, would not be a moment. It would be a pattern. And patterns could be broken just as easily as they were built. 6 months passed without incident. Contact remained limited, structured, and predictable. My parents did not push for more. They did not test boundaries again. They followed the rules not with warmth, but with awareness. Every interaction carried the quiet understanding that access was no longer assumed. Life continued to move forward. My health stabilized. The twins grew louder, faster, more curious about the world. My work expanded in ways I could manage without sacrificing them. Jessica remained close, not out of obligation, but choice. The structure I had built held. Then, one evening, Jessica called with news I had not anticipated. Our parents had decided to move again. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They had found a smaller place closer to public transport and sold what little remained of their old expectations. My father had kept his job. My mother had started volunteering twice a week. Therapy continued, not as a performance, but as routine. They had stopped talking about me as the solution. That change mattered more than any apology. A week later, my father asked, through Jessica, if I would consider letting them meet the twins under the same conditions as before. Public place, short visit, no assumptions, no roles. I agreed. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. My parents did not reach for the children. They waited. The twins approached when they felt ready. There were no promises made. No emotional declarations, just presence, cautious and restrained. When it ended, my mother thanked me without asking when it would happen again. My father said nothing, only nodded. That was the moment I knew the story had finally shifted. Not because they had changed completely, but because they no longer believed they were entitled to be unchanged. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, I sat alone and reviewed everything that had led here. The surgery, the refusal, the collapse, the pressure, the silence, the boundaries, the consequences. None of it had been planned. All of it had been necessary. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel healed. I felt clear. Clear about who I was responsible for. Clear about what I would never accept again. Clear about the fact that love without respect was never love at all. Whatever relationship existed going forward would exist only because it was earned, maintained, and limited by choice. And for the first time in my life, that choice belonged entirely to me. You have reached the end of the text.